High above the clouds, where mortal eyes have never gazed, there lies a secret so terrifying even the gods tried to erase it. Long ago, in the forgotten corners of the heavens, celestial beings made mistakes, catastrophic, world-shaking failures they couldn't bear to remember. But these weren't just ordinary errors. They were abominations so powerful, so dangerous, that the divine had no choice but to lock them away in towering sky crypts, hidden beyond time itself. Imagine vast, crumbling temples floating among the stars, their doors sealed with ancient magic, guarding horrors even the heavens feared. These are the mythic sky crypts, the divine dumping ground for creations too flawed, too monstrous to exist. Why would beings of pure perfection need to bury their failures? Because even gods aren't infallible. Their experiments twisted into nightmares, their grand designs collapsed into ruin, and their most ambitious creations turned against them. Some say these crypts still drift in the void, whispering warnings of pride and hubris. Others believe whatever was buried there didn't stay dead. Today, we're pulling back the veil on these celestial graveyards, uncovering the truth behind the gods' greatest regrets. What kind of horrors demanded such extreme measures? What unspeakable mistakes did the divine abandon in these forbidden vaults? And most chilling of all, could they ever break free? This isn't just a story of ancient myths. It's a tale of ambition gone wrong, of power unchecked, and of the arrogance that even immortals couldn't escape. The mythic sky crypts are more than ruins, they're cosmic cautionary tales, etched into the fabric of the heavens. And as we journey deeper into their secrets, you'll begin to see echoes of these celestial failures in our own world. Because whether mortal or divine, no one is immune to the consequences of playing with forces beyond their control. So brace yourself, we're about to step into the shadows where the gods themselves dared not linger. The truth is waiting, and it's far stranger than you've ever imagined. The idea that gods could fail seems unthinkable after all. Aren't they supposed to be all-knowing, all-powerful? Yet cultures across the ancient world told stories of divine missteps, cosmic blunders so profound they reshaped existence itself. Take the Greek titan Prometheus, who defied Zeus to give fire to humanity, only to unleash chaos and suffering as a result. Or the Norse god Loki, whose tricks spiraled into disasters that even he couldn't undo. These myths reveal a striking truth: perfection wasn't the hallmark of the divine. Instead, celestial beings wrestled with ambition, pride, and miscalculation, just like mortals. Why would civilizations imagine their gods as flawed? Because myths aren't just about worship, they're mirrors reflecting humanity's own struggles. When the Babylonians described the god Marduk battling the primordial chaos monster Tiamat, they weren't just recounting a cosmic war. They were grappling with the reality that even creation itself emerged from violence and imperfection. Similarly, Hindu scriptures speak of the god Brahma accidentally crafting grotesque creatures in his haste, then hiding them away in shadowy realms. These stories served as warnings. If gods could err, then mortals must tread carefully. But the most chilling tales come from cultures that believed divine failures weren't just embarrassing, they were dangerous. The Aztecs feared that the sun might fail to rise unless fed with human blood, a belief born from their god's struggle to maintain cosmic order. In Egypt, the god Ra's aging nearly doomed the world until magic restored his power. These weren't just metaphors, they were explanations for natural disasters, droughts, and plagues, proof that even the heavens weren't immune to collapse. What's fascinating is how these myths humanize the divine. By showing gods as fallible, ancient people made them relatable. A deity who never stumbled would feel distant, unapproachable. But one who tripped and fell, that was a god who understood mortal weakness. Yet there's a darker layer here too. If celestial beings could err, then their creations, whether monsters or cursed artifacts, might still lurk in forgotten corners of existence. And that's where the sky crypts come in. These weren't just divine trash heaps, they were quarantines holding cells for mistakes too volatile to destroy. Because some failures, it seems, even the gods couldn't undo. From the floating ruins of Greek Tartarus to the inverted heavens of Hindu Patala, cultures worldwide envisioned the skies as a prison for the divine's most dangerous mistakes. These weren't just random myths, they were eerily consistent warnings, etched into the collective imagination of humanity. Take Tartarus, a chasm so deep it was said to lie beneath the earth, yet stretched upward into the cosmos, where the Titans, once glorious rulers, were chained after their war with the gods. Even Zeus feared what might escape that celestial dungeon. Half a world away, the Hindu underworld Patala served a similar purpose, its 7 layers cradling not just demons but the twisted experiments of the gods themselves, beasts with too many eyes, cities that breathed like living things, all sealed away where their chaos couldn't infect creation. The Aztecs told of Tlalocan, a paradise-turned prison in the clouds where the rain god Tlaloc banished his failed creations, children born with his blessing who later angered him, transformed into monstrous spirits that howled during storms. Even the Chinese celestial bureaucracy had its own version, Tianlong, the heavenly vault where disgraced dragons and rogue star deities were imprisoned in constellations, their eternal punishment written across the night sky. What's striking is how these cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, all reached the same conclusion. When the divine messed up, the evidence had to be hidden up there, far from mortal hands. But why the sky? Because it represented the ultimate barrier, unreachable, untouchable, a realm where only gods could tread. Burying failures underground might hide them, but locking them in the heavens added a layer of sacred terror. These crypts weren't just storage, they were cosmic quarantine zones patrolled by divine sentinels. The Maya believed the star demons of Xibalba were kept in check by the hero twins, who played a deadly ball game to maintain their prison seals. Norse myth spoke of the chain Gleipnir, thin as silk but unbreakable, tethering the wolf Fenrir to a celestial rock until Ragnarok. The message was clear: some mistakes were too catastrophic to bury. They had to be displayed, suspended in the void as a reminder. Yet the most haunting detail emerges from the silences, the things these myths don't say. None of these sky crypts were truly secure. Tartarus' gates groaned under the weight of its prisoners. Patala's layers sometimes cracked, leaking nightmares into the world. Tlalocan's wails still reached human ears. These stories hint at a chilling truth. Even the gods' best efforts couldn't fully contain what they'd unleashed. And that begs the question, if these celestial tombs ever fully opened, would we even recognize what crawled out? The celestial crypts weren't just prisons, they were masterpieces of divine engineering, built to defy physics and time itself. Ancient texts describe these structures as realms where the laws of reality bent to contain the uncontainable. Take the Babylonian Juwat, a labyrinth of floating obsidian towers suspended in the void, their gates sealed with incantations so potent that speaking them aloud could shatter a mortal's mind. The walls pulsed with trapped storms, and the corridors shifted like living things, ensuring no prisoner could ever memorize their escape. Even the air was a weapon, charged with divine wrath. It scorched the lungs of any who breathed without permission. The Hindu Kalasutra offers another glimpse into these impossible architectures, a prison woven from the threads of dying stars, its bars forged in the heart of black holes. According to the Puranas, the gods used the screams of vanquished demons to power its locks, each wail tightening the chains that held their failures. The prison had no fixed location. It drifted between dimensions, untouchable, its coordinates known only to the deity Yama, the keeper of cosmic justice. Even time behaved differently there. A single second inside could stretch into eons outside, ensuring that by the time a prisoner broke free, the world they once knew would be dust. But perhaps the most chilling design came from the Aztec Tlalocan, a sky crypt disguised as paradise. Towering waterfalls of liquid silver cascaded into bottomless chasms, their beauty hiding the truth. Each drop was a prison for a failed creation. The gardens bloomed with flowers that sang lullabies to pacify the trapped, while the paths rearranged themselves into endless circles, tricking escapees into walking back to their cells. And at its heart stood the mirror of smoking stars, a relic that showed prisoners not their reflections, but the moments of their greatest shame over and over until repentance or madness took them. These structures shared one terrifying feature: they were alive. The Greek Tartarus grew new tunnels to isolate its most dangerous inmates, while the Norse Ironwood expanded its walls with the bones of those who tried to flee. These weren't static dungeons, they adapted, learned, and retaliated. The Mayan Zabalba was said to whisper to its prisoners in voices stolen from their loved ones, feeding on their despair to strengthen its seals. And according to Egyptian texts, the Duat's gates were guarded by sentient shadows, beings that consumed not flesh but memory, leaving escapees hollow shells with no past to cling to. What's truly unsettling is how these descriptions echo across cultures, as if humanity glimpsed the same nightmare from different angles. The floating prisons, the shifting labyrinths, the living barriers, all point to a shared understanding. Some mistakes are so profound, they demand prisons that defy nature itself. And if the myths hold even a sliver of truth, these crypts might still be out there, hovering silently in the dark, their locks growing weaker with each passing age. Locked away in the swirling mists between stars, the sky crypts were never left unguarded. The gods knew their failed creations were too cunning, too hungry to trust to mere walls and chains. So they appointed guardians forged from the same divine power that birthed the horrors they contained. These weren't just jailers, they were nightmares given form, creatures whose sole purpose was to outlast eternity itself. Take the Babylonian Mushasu, a dragon with scales harder than diamond and 3 sets of eyes, one to see the past, one the present, and one fixed eternally on the future. Its venom could dissolve time, leaving escapees frozen in a single agonizing moment forever. Or consider the Slavic Zme, a serpent with 7 heads, each whispering a different lie to unravel the sanity of those who dared approach its domain. Some guardians were former prisoners themselves, like the Greek Hecatoncheires, 100-handed giants once locked in Tartarus until the gods realized their very deformity made them perfect wardens. Their countless limbs could reshape the prison's corridors at will, while their 50 heads spat lava to seal breaches. Even more terrifying were the fallen angels of Zoroastrian myth, the devas, once celestial beings, now twisted into gaunt, winged sentinels with voices that could vibrate a prisoner's bones to dust. Their punishment for rebellion, an eternity of ensuring no other mistake escaped divine justice. But the most chilling gods weren't beasts or outcast angels, they were the crypts themselves. Hindu texts describe Kala Nemi, a sentient storm that circled Patala, its lightning rewriting the memories of anything it struck. Escapees might flee, only to forget their own names, their crimes, even the concept of freedom. Aztec legends speak of Itzpapalotl, a blade-winged goddess whose touch didn't kill but calcified, turning intruders into living statues, their terrified faces preserved in obsidian for future prisoners to see. These guardians didn't just stop escapes, they weaponized despair, turning hope into another layer of imprisonment. What unites these protectors across cultures is their cruel ingenuity. The Norse Garma, a wolf chained at the entrance to Nastran, didn't just bite. He severed the threads of fate from his victims, erasing their destinies. Egyptian Ammut, the devourer of souls, waited at the Duat's gates to consume not the body, but the very essence of those who tried to pass. These beings were designed to break more than flesh. They attacked identity, time, even the soul's fabric, because the gods understood something primal. To contain monsters, you must become something monstrous. Yet for all their power, the guardians had one flaw: they were still part of the crypts, and like the prisoners, they too were bound by the gods' original sin, imperfection. The Mayan Camazots, bat-like sentinels that dripped acid from their fangs, were blind in daylight. The Chinese Jiangshi, reanimated divine executioners, froze if their talismans were flipped upside down. Even the mighty hecatonchires could be distracted by their own reflections, their 100 hands pausing to marvel at their grotesque beauty. The gods, in their haste to contain their failures, had created jailers with cracks in their armor. And cracks, given enough time, always widen. Perhaps that's the most haunting thought of all. These guardians weren't just preventing escapes, they were holding back a tide. Each multi-headed beast, each fallen angel, stood between the world and what the gods feared enough to imprison in the sky. If even one failed, what ancient horror might slither down to earth, whispering of divine mistakes too terrible to name? The myths don't answer, they only echo with the sound of chains stretching tighter across the centuries, waiting to snap. The oldest whispers of sky crypts stretch back to Mesopotamia, where the gods didn't just bury their mistakes, they etched warnings into clay. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written over 4,000 years ago, describes the heavenly Abzu, a prison suspended between the waters above and the waters below, where the god Enki banished his earliest flawed creations. Cuneiform tablets speak of beings with too many limbs and voices that cracked the earth, sealed away in a vault of star metal that even time couldn't corrode. But the most chilling detail, the Abzu wasn't just a tomb, it was a lesson. Its walls were inscribed with the names of every god who dared tamper with the fabric of life, their hubris preserved for eternity. Egyptian texts reveal an even darker parallel. The Book of the Dead mentions the Juat Netjer, a celestial labyrinth where Ra imprisoned the Shute shadow creatures spawned from his own failed attempts to perfect humanity. Papyrus scrolls depict these entities as faceless, their forms shifting like smoke, locked behind gates of black fire. But here's what unsettles scholars: the Juat Netjer wasn't stationary. It moved with Ra's solar bark, trailing the sun like a cursed twin, suggesting even the gods couldn't fully escape their blunders. A hieroglyphic hymn from the Temple of Edfu warns, "Do not gaze upward when the sky weeps for the buried one's hunger." What makes these accounts so compelling is their eerie consistency. Both cultures describe the crypts as alive. The Babylonian Enuma Elish tells of the Abzu's gates growing thorns when approached, while Egyptian coffin texts speak of the Juat Netjer's walls breathing, contracting like a lung to crush intruders. These weren't passive tombs, they were reactive prisons designed to anticipate escape. But the real revelation lies in what these myths imply about divine fallibility. The Mesopotamian god Enki wept as he sealed the Abzu, lamenting in a surviving lamentation tablet. "I shaped them in joy, but they knew only rage." Ra, in contrast, showed no remorse. A pyramid text from Saqqara coldly states, "The sun discards what it cannot fix." Two approaches to failure, one tinged with grief, the other with ruthless pragmatism, yet both leading to the same conclusion: some creations are too dangerous to exist. The most haunting artifact, though, comes from the city of Ur. A broken cylinder seal depicts winged figures dragging a chained giant into the clouds, its face deliberately scratched away. The accompanying inscription, simply Ker, the Sumerian word for mountain, but also underworld, a cryptic hint that these sky crypts might not have been as distant as the gods claimed, that their failures loomed closer than anyone dared admit. Perhaps that's why these myths endured, not just as tales of cosmic housekeeping, but as whispered confessions. Even the divine couldn't outrun what they'd unleashed. Beneath the roots of the world, where even sunlight fears to tread, lies Tartarus, the Olympians' most unforgiving prison. Unlike ordinary dungeons, this abyss wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a cosmic wound, carved into creation as a reminder of the gods' most brutal victory. When Zeus and his siblings overthrew the Titans, they faced an impossible dilemma. How do you imprison beings who shaped mountains and drank rivers? The answer was a realm so deep it defied the very concept of escape. Hesiod's Theogony describes Tartarus as far below earth as earth is below heaven, a chasm where bronze gates groan under the weight of eternity and walls forged by Hephaestus pulse like a living thing. But Tartarus wasn't just a holding cell for defeated titans. It became the Olympians' dumping ground for every threat too monstrous to destroy. Here, the Cyclopes toiled in eternal darkness, their single eyes blinded by the very gods they'd armed with thunderbolts. The Hecatoncheires, those 100-handed giants who'd fought beside Zeus, were rewarded with chains, their strength too volatile to roam free. Even divine lawbreakers like Ixion, the first mortal to spill kin blood, dangled on a flaming wheel, his screams echoing through the abyss as a warning. What's chilling is how Tartarus adapted to its inmates. When the Titan Prometheus defied Zeus by gifting fire to humanity, his punishment wasn't just eternal torment, it was a cage tailored to his kindness. Each day, an eagle tore at his liver. Each night, it regenerated, ensuring his suffering mirrored humanity's endless hunger for innovation. The prison's most infamous resident, though, was Kronos. The Titan who devoured his own children now languished in a void where time fractured. Some myths say he was chained to a throne of basalt, forced to watch his own reign replayed in shattered mirrors. A cruel joke by Zeus, proving even the god of time could be trapped in his own past. Others whisper that Tartarus didn't just hold Kronos, it fed on him, his unraveling essence powering the barriers that kept other prisoners sealed. Yet the darkest secret of Tartarus isn't its torments, it's the fear woven into its design. The Olympians didn't just banish their enemies, they built a place where rebellion itself was rendered meaningless. The poet Pindar wrote of a black wind that stifled cries before they reached the surface, while Euripides described rivers of liquid silence, drowning even the echoes of resistance. This wasn't justice, it was cosmic censorship, a guarantee that no one would ever hear the Titan's side of the story. What makes Tartarus unique among sky crypts is its duality. While other divine prisons floated beyond reach, this one lurked beneath a constant, suffocating presence. Farmers in Attica swore they felt its heat through the soles of their sandals. Sailors near Sicily avoided waters that bubbled without reason. The message was clear, the gods' failures weren't safely distant. They were close enough to touch if you dared, and perhaps that was the final lesson of Tartarus, not just for titans but for mortals. The Olympians' victory wasn't clean. It left scars and some wounds, even divine ones, never truly close. Far to the east of Asgard, beyond the 9 realms, there sprawled a nightmare even the gods feared to name: Ironwood. This wasn't just a forest of twisted metal trees, but a living prison woven from Loki's own treachery. Here, in this groaning expanse of rust and shadow, the Aesir sealed away the trickster god's most monstrous progeny: Fenrir the world wolf, Jormungandr the serpent large enough to bite its own tail, and Hel, whose face was half corpse, half living flesh. Unlike Tartarus's fiery pits or the Duat's shifting labyrinths, Ironwood was a cage of cruel irony, its bars forged from the same chaos its inmates embodied. The legends say Odin himself designed Ironwood's torments. Fenrir, who would one day devour the Allfather, was bound with Gleipnir, a chain thinner than spider silk, yet stronger than any metal, crafted from the sound of a cat's footsteps and the roots of mountains. The more the wolf strained, the tighter it became, etching prophecies of Ragnarök into his flesh with every struggle. Jormungandr was tossed into the sea surrounding Midgard, but Ironwood's magic pulled the waters inward, creating a whirlpool where the serpent coiled endlessly, his venom dripping onto the roots of Yggdrasil, poisoning the world tree drop by drop. As for Hel, Odin gave her a kingdom, but one built from the ashes of her own mortality. Niflheim's frozen wastes became her domain, where she'd rule over those who died ingloriously, her throne a chair of hollowed-out bones. What makes Ironwood unique among celestial prisons isn't just its inhabitants, but its inevitable failure. The Völuspá, the Vikings' most sacred prophecy, foretold that Ironwood's bindings would weaken with each passing winter. Fenrir's drool would form rivers of acid corroding Gleipnir's fibers. Jormungandr's thrashing would churn the sea into a storm that drowned the stars. Even Hel's silent resentment would fester, swelling her army of the dead until it overflowed into the realm of the living. Unlike other sky crypts which tried to contain their prisoners eternally, Ironwood was always meant to break because Ragnarök wasn't just an apocalypse. It was a divine reckoning, the gods' own failures snapping back like a coiled spring. The chilling genius of Ironwood lies in its duality. It wasn't just a prison, it was a time bomb. Every howl from Fenrir, every drip of Jormungandr's venom, every soul added to Hel's ranks. They weren't signs of the prison's strength, but of its slow unraveling. The poetic Edda describes Odin frequently visiting Ironwood, not to reinforce its wards, but to listen, to hear the growth of Fenrir's hatred, to measure the serpent's coils, to count the dead in Hel's halls. Because the Allfather knew some mistakes can't be buried, they can only be postponed, and when the day came, the chains would shatter not because the gods were weak, but because they'd been wise enough to know no cage lasts forever. Perhaps that's the most haunting lesson of Ironwood. Other mythologies hid their failures in distant heavens or bottomless chasms, pretending they could be forgotten. But the Norse gods, they built their prison in plain sight, a gnarled scar across creation, forcing every mortal and deity alike to confront an uncomfortable truth. Even divine justice has an expiration date. The wolves that prowl Ironwood's edges aren't just prisoners, they're timekeepers, and their hour is always drawing nearer. In the cosmic dance of Hindu mythology, where creation and destruction whirl in endless cycles, the Devas faced a problem no amount of divine power could easily solve. Their immortal enemies, the Asuras, kept coming back. No matter how many battles were won, how many heads were severed, these primordial forces of chaos refused to stay dead. So the gods devised a solution both brilliant and terrifying. Prisons not bound by earth or sky, but suspended in the liminal spaces between worlds. The Vedas call these celestial gulags the Asura Vaults, and their descriptions would make even the bravest mortal shudder. Picture this: towering spheres of molten copper, spinning silently in the void, their surfaces etched with mantras so potent they vibrate across dimensions. Inside, time doesn't flow in one direction, it spirals, loops, and knots itself, ensuring prisoners relive their worst moments on endless repeat. The Rigveda describes one such vault, Tranasya, where the demon king Vritra lies coiled like a serpent around a false sun, his fangs sunk into his own tail. Every time he tries to speak a curse, the words turn to ash in his throat, fed back to him by the prison's self-sustaining torment. But the most chilling detail: these prisons weren't just traps, they were alive. The Atharvaveda speaks of the vault, Ahabudnya, its walls woven from the still-breathing skin of a defeated Asura, stretching and contracting to deny its inmates even the comfort of stillness. Other texts mention Svabhanu, a prison shaped like an inverted lotus where each petal is a mirror showing the captive not their reflection, but the moment of their greatest shame. The genius of the Devas was in understanding that to cage an immortal, you must attack the very concept of identity. The Asura Vaults also reveal a darker truth about divine justice. While the Greeks chained titans in Tartarus and the Norse bound Fenrir with enchanted rope, the Devas weaponized illusion. The demon Mahishasura, who once shook the heavens with his buffalo-headed fury, was locked in Mayasura, a vault that feeds its prisoners visions of victory, only to dissolve them at the moment of triumph. Over and over, Mahishasura raises his sword to strike Indra, only to find the god replaced by a mocking breeze. It's psychological warfare on a cosmic scale, proving that even gods can be cruel when fear outweighs mercy. Yet the most unsettling vault might be Kalanola, the time fire. Described in the Mahabharata, it's a prison without walls, just an endless plain where every step forward pulls the prisoner backward through time. Here, the Asura Hiranyakashipu, who once demanded worship as the supreme being, crawls toward a throne that forever recedes, his immortal body aging and rejuvenating in a loop. The message is clear: the Devas didn't just punish rebellion, they turned arrogance into its own hell. What makes these myths so compelling isn't just their creativity, but their honesty. Unlike other pantheons that buried their failures in forgotten crypts, Hindu scriptures name the Asura Vaults, detailing their horrors without flinching. There's no pretense of divine infallibility here. The Devas didn't just lock away their enemies, they enshrined them in myth as cautionary tales, reminders that even gods must sometimes resort to ruthless ingenuity. Because some forces are too relentless to destroy, too cunning to ignore, the only option, a prison that outsmarts eternity itself. Across the misty green hills of ancient Ireland, where the veil between worlds grows thin, the Tuatha De Danann ruled not just the land but the skies above it. These Celtic gods, radiant with power and pride, faced a challenge no spear or spell could solve: what to do with enemies too formidable to kill and too dangerous to leave free. Their answer: the Shia prisons, floating fortresses of silver cloud and perpetual twilight, where time itself bent to the will of the captors. Unlike the Greeks howling Tartarus or the Norse's groaning Ironwood, the Tuatha's prisons were deceptively beautiful. Irish texts describe them as palaces of ever-shifting mist, their walls woven from the very breath of the gods, hiding horrors behind a facade of celestial splendor. One such prison, Tech Duin, the House of Dawn, served as the holding place for the Fomorians, the monstrous sea gods who once rivaled the Tuatha for dominion. But this was no ordinary dungeon. The Liber Gabala Iren tells how the Tuatha tricked their foes into entering what seemed a grand feasting hall, its tables piled high with golden fruit and rivers of mead. Only when the doors sealed did the illusion melt away, revealing the truth. The fruits were globes of trapped lightning, the mead a river of liquid time, and the hall itself a cage drifting on the winds. Here, the Fomorian king Bala of the Evil Eye raged against his bindings, his deadly gaze reflected endlessly by mirrored clouds, turning his own power against him. Yet the Tuatha's most ingenious prison wasn't reserved for enemies, it housed their own kind. When the beloved godlug sought vengeance for his father's murder, he didn't kill the kin-slaying brothers who committed the act. Instead, he cast them into Mag Mell, the Plain of Joy, a paradise so intoxicating it became their torment. The Yellow Book of Lekon describes how the brothers danced eternally under jeweled trees, their laughter turning to screams as they realized they could never stop, never rest, never escape the ecstasy that hollowed them. The message was clear: even paradise could be a prison when gifted by furious hands. What sets these Celtic sky crypts apart is their intimate connection to the land below. While other mythologies sealed failures in distant voids, the Tuatha's prisons hovered just beyond mortal sight. Fishermen off the coast of Connemara swore they glimpsed Tech Duin's shadow through the storm clouds, while shepherds in the Burren heard faint music from Mag Mell drifting down with the evening dew. This proximity wasn't accidental, it served as a warning. The gods' mistakes weren't abstract legends, they lingered close enough to touch, a reminder that even the divine could falter. The most chilling detail lies in what these myths don't say. Unlike the Norse, who prophesied their prison's eventual collapse, or the Greeks, who feared Tartarus's groaning gates, the Tuatha's records fall silent on whether their cloud dungeons still hold. Perhaps that silence is the most telling clue of all. Because in Ireland, where sea mist still curls like grasping fingers over the cliffs, some say the silver prisons never left. They merely wait, their charges stirring behind the veil, dreaming of the day the wind changes direction. The Aztecs didn't just fear the end of the world, they built their entire cosmology around it. According to their sacred texts, we live in the era of the fifth sun, a fragile cosmic age preceded by 4 catastrophic failures. But those earlier worlds didn't just vanish, their wrecked creator gods were still out there, locked away in floating prisons known as Ilhuaquatl, the heavenly dwellings of the gods. These weren't passive graves, they were celestial quarantine zones where the architects of broken worlds simmered in their own disgrace. The Florentine Codex, a 16th century record of Aztec beliefs, describes how each failed sun ended in annihilation. The first world, Nahui-Oslotl, was ruled by the god Tezcatlipoca until his rival Quetzalcoatl knocked him from the sky, transforming him into a jaguar that devoured the earth. The second sun, Nahui-Ehecatl, ended when Quetzalcoatl himself lost control, unleashing hurricanes that swept humanity away. And so it went, worlds destroyed by fire, flood, and monstrous winds, each collapse orchestrated by the very gods who'd tried to build them. But here's what most myths omit: after each apocalypse, the disgraced creators weren't killed. They were preserved, sealed inside glowing orbs that still hang in the night sky. These sky tombs weren't just storage, they were lessons. The Aztecs believed the imprisoned gods radiated their failures downward, influencing human destiny. The Leyenda de los Sols warns that Tezcatlipoca's tomb, now the planet Jupiter, pulses with his resentment, causing wars and madness when it aligns with certain stars. Quetzalcoatl's prison, Venus, shines brightest just before dawn, a reminder that even the god of wisdom couldn't escape his mistakes. The celestial spheres became a divine scoreboard, their movements dictating when to plant crops, when to wage war, and when to offer blood to keep the current sun from joining its predecessors. Yet the most chilling detail lies in the tomb's design. Unlike Tartarus's chains or Ironwood's living branches, the Ilhuaquatl were beautiful gilded cages that dazzled the eye while crushing the spirit. The Codex Borgia depicts them as intricate, jeweled structures filled with hallucinogenic flowers and singing birds, their splendor calibrated to torment. A defeated creator god would spend eternity surrounded by everything they'd failed to protect, their prisons designed to amplify regret. The sun god Tanatia, keeper of the fifth sun, made regular pilgrimages to these tombs, not to gloat but to listen, to hear the weeping of his predecessors and remind himself what awaited him if he faltered. What makes these sky tombs unique is their interactivity. They weren't static relics, they communicated. Aztec priests tracked their movements like celestial parole officers, interpreting eclipses as the imprisoned gods gnawing at their bonds. Solar flares were their breath fogging the glass. Even human sacrifice took on new meaning. The Aztecs believed blood sacrifice didn't just nourish Tanatia, but weighted the tombs, keeping their occupants from breaking free. The Annals of Cuautitlan describes a panic in the year 1 read, when Jupiter and Venus aligned too closely. Priests rushed to sacrifice 800 captives in a single day, their spilled blood forming a chain of rubies in the sky to pull the tombs apart. The terrifying genius of the Ilhuaquatl was their inevitability. The Aztecs didn't just fear their son might die, they knew it would. Every 52 years during the binding of the year's ceremony, they extinguished all fires and watched the stars for signs. If the Pleiades crossed a certain point, it meant the tomb's seals were weakening. But the real horror, some texts suggest the fifth sun's tomb is already built, a hollow sphere waiting in the void for the day Tanatia joins his failed brethren. Because in Aztec cosmology, the only thing more certain than destruction is the gods' refusal to learn from it. Perhaps that's why these myths endure. Other cultures buried their divine failures in distant realms or beneath the earth, but the Aztecs hung them overhead for all to see. Every sunrise wasn't just a gift, it was a reprieve. Every star wasn't just a light, it was a warning. And if you listen closely on a quiet night, the wind still carries whispers from those celestial prisons, not of rage but of longing. Because the cruelest punishment for a creator isn't chains or darkness. It's being forced to watch your replacement succeed where you could not. High above the mortal realm, where the Jade Emperor's palace gleams with untouchable splendor, there exists a shadowy counterpart, a network of celestial black sites known only as the Dixing Chanlao, the star prisons of Earth. These weren't just dungeons for rebellious spirits or fallen demons. They were the heavenly bureaucracy's darkest secret, re-education camps for incompetent immortals. Imagine a cosmic penal system where lazy star deities, bumbling weather gods, and careless keepers of fate were dragged before celestial magistrates, their badges of office ripped away as they vanished into the void, sentenced to corrective enlightenment. Ancient Taoist texts like the Taishang Dongyuan Shenju Jing describe these prisons as inverted pagodas floating in the sea of chaos, their rooftops piercing downward into nothingness. Inside, disgraced immortals endured a torment uniquely tailored to their failures. The god of floods who slept through a drought might find himself drowning eternally in a single drop of water, his lungs filling and emptying in an endless loop. A guardian of time who misplaced an hour would relive that missing moment again and again, his fingers perpetually slipping as he tried to grasp the hands of a broken clock. The genius of the Dixing Tianlao was its cruel precision. It didn't just punish, it taught, but the most feared facility was Yanluodian, the court of Yanluo. Unlike its underworld counterpart that judged mortal souls, this celestial version specialized in reprocessing high-ranking immortals. The Yunji Kikian, a 10th century Taoist encyclopedia, recounts how the moon goddess Chang once spent 3 centuries thereafter accidentally shrinking the tides. Her punishment, weaving moonlight into ropes strong enough to lasso her own regrets, only to watch them unravel at dawn. Even more chilling were the mirror chambers, where officials who abused their power faced infinite reflections of their victims' suffering, each stare a branding iron on their immortal souls. What set these prisons apart from other mythic crypts was their bureaucratic efficiency. While Tartarus roared with the screams of titans and Ironwood creaked under Fenrir's rage, the Dixing Tianlao operated with eerie silence. No howling, no rattling chains, just the soft scratch of celestial scribes recording every shudder of repentance. The Jade Box Annals describe a complex hierarchy of jailers, clerks who tallied sins on abacuses made of bone, censors who recited edicts through gagged mouths, and the infamous ministers of balanced scales who calibrated punishments to the milligram. This wasn't just justice, it was celestial accounting where every misdeed had a ledger entry and every scream balanced the books. Yet for all their order, the star prisons held a terrifying flaw. Unlike the Asura Vaults' illusions or Tartarus's physical chains, the Dixing Tianlao relied on something far more fragile, shame. And shame, as the Jade Emperor would learn, has an expiration date. Folktales whisper of a few escaped inmates not through force but through loopholes. The river god who realized his tormentor's scrolls had a misspelled character voiding his sentence. The stove deity who burned her own paperwork faster than the clerks could rewrite it. Even Yanluo himself allegedly turned a blind eye when the beloved fox spirit Daji bribed her way out with forged certificates of virtue. Perhaps that's the most unsettling truth hidden in these myths. The heavenly bureaucracy, for all its divine majesty, was just as corruptible as any earthly court. And if even the gods couldn't keep their own prisons secure, what did that say about the cosmic order they enforced? The answer might lie in the final fate of the Dixing Tianlao. By the Ming dynasty, temples quietly stopped mentioning them. Some say the Jade Emperor dismantled them after a scandal. Others believe they still exist, hidden behind veils of bureaucratic paperwork, their existence redacted from celestial records. But in rural China, when a star flickers oddly on a clear night, elders still mutter a warning. Someone's filing an appeal. Deep in the heart of Yoruba cosmology, where the threads of destiny weave through mortal and divine alike, there lies a secret so potent even the Orishas dare not speak its name. The Ajagun Ibakji, the exile realms of the Second Order. These weren't just prisons, they were celestial purgatories, floating islands of ash and lightning where the gods banished their own. Unlike the roaring dungeons of Greek or Norse myth, these realms operated on a different principle: balance. Because in Yoruba belief, even divinity has limits, and some mistakes risk unraveling the very fabric of Iyanmo, the cosmic order. The most infamous of these exiles was Orun Apadi, the broken heaven. According to the Odu Ifa, the sacred divination texts, this realm was created when the warrior Orisha Ogun, in a fit of rage, forged a blade so sharp it could cut the threads of fate itself. Horrified by what he'd done, the other Orishas didn't cast him out, they lifted him. Orun Apadi hovered just beyond the edge of the visible sky, its jagged cliffs made from the shattered remnants of Ogun's own creations. Here, the god of iron was doomed to endlessly reforge his cursed blade, only for it to disintegrate each time he reached for the hilt. But the true torment lay in the realm's cruel design. Orun Apadi mirrored the earth below. Ogun could watch mortals wield his inventions, plows, scalpels, the very tools of civilization, while his hands remained eternally empty. Yet Ogun's exile was merciful compared to that of Oya Iku, the goddess of storms. When she unleashed a whirlwind that nearly tore the world tree Iroko from its roots, the Orishas crafted a prison unlike any other, a Mimu, the breath that devours. Imagine a floating storm with no eye, no end, where Oya's beloved winds became her jailers. The Odu Os Meji describes her circling the realm's edges, her lightning reflected back at her by walls of enchanted rain. But the most devastating detail, the Orishas gave Mimu a single gap in its clouds, a window facing the mortal world. On the one day each year when Oya's winds had once brought life-giving rain to the savannah, she could only watch as the land withered without her. Not all exiles were born of rage, though. Some Orishas fell to something far more dangerous: ambition. The trickster Esu, guardian of crossroads, once tried to outwit destiny itself by diverting a soul's path. His punishment, Ona Often, the path of no return, a maze of floating roads that twisted into countless dead ends. Unlike the Greek labyrinth, this prison had no center, just endless branching choices, each leading to consequences Esu couldn't manipulate. The Odu Otropon chillingly notes that the Orishas didn't silence Esu's famed laughter. They let it echo through the maze, a constant reminder that even the master of tricks couldn't outplay cosmic law. What makes these exile realms unique is their intimacy. While other mythologies hid failures in distant voids, the Yoruba Orishas kept theirs close, visible yet untouchable, like scars on the face of the sky. Elders in Isle Ife still point to certain constellations, whispering that they're not stars at all, but the embers of Ogun's forge or the flicker of Oya's trapped lightning. Because in Yoruba tradition, the gods' failures weren't secrets to bury, they were lessons to remember. The Orishas, for all their power, were never infallible. And if even they could falter, what did that mean for humanity? The answer lingers in those exile realms, hovering just beyond reach, not as warnings but as mirrors. Beneath the vast Polynesian sky, where the horizon kisses the endless sea, there exist gaping wounds in the heavens, star pits that swallow the light. These aren't mere voids but celestial sinkholes, forged by the trickster demigod Maui as prisons for the gods' most disastrous creations. The Maori called them Rua Kumara, the sweet potato pits of the stars, a darkly poetic name for places where divine failures fermented like spoiled harvests. According to the Kumulipo, the Hawaiian creation chant, these pits weren't just holes but living traps, their edges lined with the teeth of the cosmic shark Mono, ready to snap shut on any who dared escape. One such pit, Ki-Ona o Kalani, the Cave of Heaven, held the fire goddess Peel's rebellious brother Kamoholi. When the shark god tried to flood the islands in a fit of jealousy, Maui didn't slay him, he tricked him. Luring Kamoholi into a celestial whirlpool with promises of a greater kingdom, Maui chanted the pit's walls into existence, weaving them from the very stars Kamoholi had sought to claim. Now the shark god drifts in a slow spiral, his rage fueling the pit's currents, his thrashing tail stirring the tides yet never breaking free. Sailors near Tahiti still whisper that on moonless nights you can hear his growls echo through the waves, a reminder that even gods can be outmaneuvered. But the most infamous star pit lies in the constellation Maui's fishhook. Te Punga Oti Rangi, the anchor of the sky, was designed for a far darker purpose, to imprison not just rebellious deities but ideas. When the god Tain's experiment to create immortal humans backfired, birthing instead the first diseased spirits, Maui couldn't destroy them, so he buried them in the sky. The Ngati Porou elders describe the pit as a tangled net of starlight, its knots tightening whenever a trapped spirit struggles, yet the horror lies in its imperfection. During solar eclipses, when the net slackens, some say the kikakiko, the flesh-eating sicknesses leak downward, their pale tendrils brushing the tops of sacred mountains before the sun returns and the pit seals once more. What sets these celestial sinkholes apart is their duality. Unlike Tartarus's rigid chains or the Asura Vaults' illusions, the star pits are fluid, as changeable as the ocean that inspired them. The Tongan Lau-Langi myths speak of pits that migrate, vanishing from one constellation only to reappear in another, their paths as unpredictable as Maui's whims. Even their guardians defy convention, not armored titans or multi-headed beasts but sound. The Samon Fafafine celestial sirens circle the pits singing counter-melodies to any escapee's chants, ensuring their magic cancels out like waves colliding in midair. Yet the true genius of the star pits lies in their transparency. While other cultures hid their divine failures in shadow, Polynesian navigators used the pits as waypoints, their dark silhouettes guiding voyagers across the Pacific. The message was clear: the gods' mistakes weren't secrets to be buried, but lessons written across the night sky. Because in Polynesia, where the sea and stars are one, even failure has its place in the cosmos, not as a warning but as part of the tide. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the waves slow their dance, you can still hear Maui laughing among the constellations, his voice a reminder that even the heavens need a trickster to keep them honest. What makes a prison capable of holding a god? Across every culture, one truth emerges: ordinary chains and bars won't suffice. The divine don't just break physical restraints, they unravel the very laws that bind them. So the ancients imagined containment that didn't just resist power, it undermined it. Take the Norse Gleipnir, the ribbon that held Fenrir, forged from impossible ingredients, the sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of mountains, the breath of fish. It wasn't strength that made it unbreakable, but concept. You can't snap a chain that's woven from silence and impossibility. Then there's the Hindu Brahmastra, a celestial net woven not from rope but from mantras. Each thread vibrated with sacred syllables, tightening whenever a prisoner uttered their own spells, turning their magic against them. The brilliance. It didn't suppress power, it redirected it, like a labyrinth that grows darker the more torches you light. Similarly, Aztec star prisons used Chalchihuatl jade mirrors that reflected a god's essence back at them. Trapped deities didn't fade from starvation, they drowned in their own radiance, their brilliance becoming a feedback loop of exhaustion. But perhaps the cruelest innovation was time twisting. The Greeks imprisoned Kronos in Tartarus with chronal shackles, forcing the Titan of Time to relive his own defeat on loop. Celtic myths describe the Shia prisons where 1 second stretched into a century, ensuring escape attempts lasted longer than civilizations. These weren't just punishments, they were psychological warfare. How do you plan a rebellion when every thought takes millennia to form? Yet the most chilling pattern emerges in how these mechanisms degrade. Gleipnir was said to fray whenever Ragnarök drew nearer. The Brahmastra's knots loosened if a prisoner learned humility. Even Tartarus' walls thinned when new sins flooded the underworld. These prisons weren't built to last, they were built to fail gloriously, their weakening designed as cosmic hourglasses. Because the real horror isn't eternal imprisonment, it's knowing your cage has an expiration date. And what waits on the other side is hungry. Inside the celestial crypts, the gods didn't just bury broken tools, they entombed their most catastrophic ambitions. Among the floating ruins and shifting labyrinths, the first horrors to greet any trespasser would be the prototypes, the gods' discarded drafts of creation. The Babylonian Enuma Elish describes the Lulu, a race of malformed humans crafted by the god E before he perfected mankind. These hollow-eyed beings lacked souls, their chests gaping with empty cavities where hearts should beat, yet they never died. Sealed in the Abzu's star metal vaults, they still whisper in perfect unison, rehearsing prayers for a world that never came. But the crypts also hold weapons too terrible even for war. Hindu scriptures speak of the Pashupatastra, a bow forged by Shiva to end all conflicts until its test firing split the sky for 12 days, scorching continents yet uninhabited. The gods, realizing their oversight, locked it in the Kalasutra prison, where its arrows now float uselessly in zero gravity, their trajectories spiraling endlessly without a target. Similarly, Norse sagas tell of Leviathan, a blade Loki sharpened on the roots of Yggdrasil. It could cut through dimensions, a feature that backfired when the sword began slicing holes in reality itself. Now it hangs in ironwood, suspended by its own impossibility, its edge perpetually splitting the same atom over and over to keep it from severing something vital. Then there are the demigods' hybrids of divine and mortal, flawed by design. The Aztecs feared Tzitzimime, star demons born when the goddess Citlalicu tried to gift humans with celestial wisdom. Her offspring emerged with shattered minds, their knowledge a cacophony of half-formed truths that drove entire cities to madness. Banished to Ilhuaquetl Teotihuacan, they now cling to the underside of the sky, their skeletal fingers scraping against the barrier like moths against glass. Even the Greeks, for all their pride, couldn't control their half-blooded mistakes. Deep in Tartarus, the Impausa, a failed attempt to fuse nymphs with fire, scuttles across the ceiling, her bronze legs screeching against the rock as she mimics the voices of loved ones to lure rescuers into the abyss. Yet the most unsettling inmates aren't the monsters or weapons, but the ideas that even gods couldn't kill. Polynesian myths warn of Ku Waha Ilo, a song so perfect it unraveled the singer's identity, reducing them to an echo. Trapped in Maui's star pits, its melody still seeps out during eclipses, leaving listeners humming tunes they swear they've known since birth. The Yoruba tell of Abiku, children destined to die and rebirth endlessly, a glitch in the cycle of reincarnation that even Oren Miller's divination couldn't fix. These spirits now drift in Orana Paddy, their laughter ringing hollow as they flicker between existence and void. What unites these crypt dwellers isn't just their danger, but their incompleteness. Their divine rough drafts abandoned when the gods realized some sparks should never be kindled, and that's the true horror lurking in these vaults. Not just what was deemed too destructive to exist, but what was deemed too imperfect to finish, because in the silence between the stars, those unfinished things still twitch. Still reach, still dream of the day their makers return to complete them. The gods didn't just lock their failures away, they scrubbed them from history like celestial censors. Across ancient texts there's a glaring pattern, gaps where knowledge should be, verses scraped from tablets, entire epics ending abruptly mid-sentence. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest stories, contains a haunting lacuna in its 11th tablet. Just as Utnapishtim describes the God's secret vaults in the heavens, the clay fractures, the next lines deliberately shattered. Later scribes even overwrote surviving fragments with mundane tax records, as if burying divine secrets under bureaucracy. This wasn't passive forgetting. It was active suppression. In Egypt, the Dwat's true nature was hidden behind 42 euphemisms, field of reeds, boat of millions, even very green place, all flowery metaphors masking a prison for Ra's shadow spawn. Priests who dared record its location had their names chiseled from tomb walls, their souls condemned to wander unremembered. The Book of the Dead contains a chilling warning. Do not read this page aloud, lest the buried hear you. Even in death, silence was enforced. The Greeks were no different. Hesiod's original Theogony allegedly contained a catalogue of Tartarus inmates, but only a single charred scrap survives, listing the 300 armed ones before the papyrus blackens. Scholars note the burn pattern suggests deliberate targeting flames that consumed only certain passages. Even Plato, usually eager to mythologize, abruptly changes subjects when describing the upper prisons in Phaedo, as if catching himself mid-revelation. But the most blatant cover-up comes from Mesoamerica. When Spanish friars transcribed Aztec cosmology, they noted entire sections of the Florentine Codex where scribes had painted over glyphs with black resin. Infrared scans revealed the censored passages, star maps marking the Ilhuaquetl-Teotihuacan tombs, annotated with warnings like, "Here lies the fifth son's doom." The Aztecs didn't just fear these prisons, they erased their coordinates, as if the act of remembering risked an avalanche. What unites these acts of divine censorship is their desperation. The gods didn't just want their failures contained, they wanted them unthought, because some truths are too dangerous to survive even as whispers. The Babylonian demon Pazuzu famously boasted he was the secret the tablets cannot hold, while Hindu rishis wrote of the Asura Vaults in disappearing ink that faded when read. These weren't myths, they were admissions. The crypt's greatest defense wasn't their locks or guardians, but humanity's forced amnesia, yet cracks remain. Polynesian navigators encoded star pit locations in knot scripts only captains could decipher. Celtic bards passed down the Shia prison's lyrics in melodies that scrambled if written. And in a tucked-away corner of an Assyrian relief, a single unscrubbed line endures. The gods fear what they cast down, a slip of the chisel perhaps, or a deliberate act of rebellion. Because try as they might, even deities can't bury every truth. Some always rise like smoke from a censer carrying the scent of buried things. In the thin air of the Andes, where clouds cling to mountain peaks like ghosts, archaeologists stumbled upon something impossible, a ruined city built at an altitude no human could survive without modern gear. The walls of Sayanmaka cling to cliffsides 3 miles above sea level, their stones fitted so precisely, not even a knife blade slides between them. Locals whisper the site wasn't made by human hands at all, but by things that fell from the sky long ago. It's just one of dozens of high-altitude ruins defying explanation, from the hanging temples of Zhangzhung in Tibet to the blood-red towers of Puma Punku, where ancient builders carved granite like butter. Could these be the physical remnants of those mythical sky crypts, weathered by time but still clinging to the edges of our world? The connection grows stranger when you examine the tools left behind. At Sayanmaka, excavators found greenish metal rods unlike any known alloy, their surfaces etched with grooves too fine for Bronze Age tools to carve. Similar artifacts turned up in the Himalayas, a set of nested silver spheres that hum when touched, their interiors layered with unknown symbols. Even more baffling are the megaliths of Göbekli Tepe, where 12,000-year-old pillars depict winged beings dragging chained figures into the sky. Archaeologists dismiss these as shamanic visions, but the carvings match descriptions of Babylonian Mushasu dragons hauling prisoners to the Abzu. Coincidence? Or evidence that ancient builders witnessed something the rest of us forgot? Then there's the aerial phenomena. Pilots flying over the Andes report bizarre electromagnetic distortions near Sayanmaka, compasses spinning wildly, altimeters failing, and occasionally flashes of light in geometric patterns. In 2017, a research drone sent to map the site vanished for 3 days, only to reappear undamaged on a nearby plateau, its camera filled with footage of a structure not listed on any survey, a stepped pyramid glowing faintly blue. The video was dismissed as a glitch, but Navajo rangers in Arizona report identical lights above Choco Canyon, where ancestral Pueblones painted star maps showing celestial kivas that trapped rogue spirits. The Hopi described these as Kachina prisons, floating realms where demigods sealed away their mistakes. The most compelling modern parallel, though, comes from declassified military reports. In 1947, Project Sign, the precursor to the U.S. Air Force's UFO investigations, documented a pilot's encounter with a floating black cube over New Mexico. His sketches are nearly identical to Hindu descriptions of the Kalasutra prison, right down to the whirling threads surrounding it. Decades later, astronauts aboard the International Space Station reported a similar anomaly, a rectangular shadow drifting against Earth's curvature, visible only through ultraviolet filters. NASA attributed it to space debris, but the timing was peculiar. It appeared during the Perseid meteor shower, which ancient Persians believed was the Asura Vaults shedding dust. Perhaps the most chilling evidence lies in climate data. Ice cores from Antarctica show spikes of iridium and nickel in layers dating to 5000 BC, metals found in meteorites, but also in Mesopotamian myths about the Abzu's star metal walls. Satellite surveys reveal gravity anomalies at the same coordinates where Polynesian oral histories place Maui's star pits. Even the Bible's Book of Enoch, long dismissed as allegory, describes mountains in the air where fallen angels were chained, a passage that takes on new weight when you compare it to LiDAR scans of Andean peaks, which show unnatural subsurface cavities shaped like coils. What does it all mean? Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Scientists argue these are textbook cases of pattern seeking our brains, forcing connections where none exist. But when you stand in Sayan-Marca at dusk, watching the stars flicker to life where the ruins meet the sky, it's hard not to wonder. The ancients didn't just imagine their celestial prisons. They built observatories to monitor them, aligned temples to their coordinates, and wove warnings into myths we're still deciphering. Whether these sites are physical proof of sky crypts or merely monuments to humanity's oldest fears, one truth remains: the line between myth and history has always been thinner than the air at those dizzying heights. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, you can still hear the chains rattling. The sky crypts weren't perfect. For all their divine engineering, some prisoners refused to stay buried. And when even a single entity escaped, the world below paid the price. Take the Greek titan Typhon, who nearly tore his way out of Tartarus during a revolt. His thrashing shoulders cracked the prison's foundations, sending quakes so violent they split the island of Sicily from the mainland. The aftershocks drowned entire coastal cities, and for months afterward, farmers found their fields littered with shards of celestial bronze fragments of Tartarus' shattered chains. The poet Hesiod wrote that Typhon's roar alone flattened forests, his breath so toxic it withered crops into dust. The gods eventually subdued him, but not before his near escape left scars still visible in the jagged cliffs of the Mediterranean. Far to the east, Hindu scriptures recount the Asura king Ravana's temporary breach from the Kalasutra prison. A master of deception, he tricked the guardian Nandi into reciting a sacred syllable backward, weakening the mantra barrier just enough to slip through. His brief freedom plunged the earth into an unnatural twilight for 7 days, as Ravana's shadow stretched across the sky like a stain. Crops failed, rivers ran backward, and children awoke speaking languages no one recognized, echoes of the Asura's scrambled thoughts leaking into mortal minds. Only when the sun god Surya personally intervened, using his chariot's wheels to sew the prison's torn fabric back together, was the balance restored. But not all escape attempts were violent. The Norse trickster Loki wriggled free from his bonds not by force but by loophole. The gods had tied him with the entrails of his own son, a cruel irony meant to bind him with remorse. But Loki, ever the wordsmith, whispered a riddle to the ravens guarding him. What chain can hold what never was? The birds, obsessed with solving the puzzle, neglected their watch just long enough for him to exploit a single frayed thread. The consequences were immediate. Earthquakes rocked Midgard as Loki's laughter echoed through the realms, and for the first time in ages, mortal graves began yielding up their dead, shambling, half-alive things that spoke in his voice. The gods recaptured him, but not before his fleeting freedom blurred the line between the living and the departed. Perhaps the most chilling near escape came from Mesoamerica. The Aztecs feared that the star demon Tezitzimitl would one day chew through her Ilhuacatl Teotihuacan tomb during a solar eclipse. Codex drawings depict her elongated jaws gnawing at the sun's edge, her spit sizzling into acid rain that melted flesh from bone. In 1521, when a total eclipse coincided with the arrival of Spanish conquistadors, priests rushed to sacrifice thousands, believing Tezitzimitl had finally broken free. The coincidence was so unnerving that even the invaders recorded it a day of darkness when the very air seemed to scream. These breaches share a haunting pattern. Whether through brute strength, trickery, or sheer cosmic bad timing, the crypt's defenses always faltered at the worst possible moment. And each time, the collateral damage wasn't just physical, it warped reality itself. The Maori tell of the demigod Wiro cracking Maui's star pit during a tantrum, his fury leaking into the ocean and birthing the first venomous sea creatures. The Yoruba blame Oran Apadi's occasional tremors for sudden outbreaks of ghost laughter, where entire villages erupt in hysterics for no reason. Even minor cracks had major consequences, proving the sky crypts were less like vaults and more like dams holding back pressures that, once released, reshaped the world below. What's truly unsettling is how these myths mirror modern anxieties. When satellites detect gamma-ray bursts from distant galaxies, or when unexplained seismic waves ripple through the Earth's crust, it's hard not to wonder, are these natural phenomena? Or the distant echoes of something stirring where the gods buried it? The ancients didn't just fear these prisons failing, they expected it. Their calendars marked danger days when celestial alignments weakened the barriers. Their temples faced specific stars, not in worship but in watchfulness, because deep down they understood a truth we've forgotten: the sky has teeth. And sometimes, when the universe isn't looking, they bite. By the time the Renaissance dawned, the ancient sky crypts had undergone a radical transformation. No longer celestial dungeons, they became the ultimate allegory for the alchemist's quest. Occultists like Paracelsus and John D. Pordover recovered Greek and Mesopotamian texts, but they didn't see prisons for divine failures. They saw encrypted blueprints for the human soul. To these scholars, the crypt star metal walls weren't barriers, they were symbolic crucibles, and the monsters inside, raw, untapped potential waiting to be transmuted. Take the legendary emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which describes a palace above the clouds where the unformed is perfected. Alchemists interpreted this as a direct reference to the Babylonian Abzu, reimagining its imprisoned Lulu not as hollow-eyed horrors but as prima materia, the chaotic base matter all transformations begin with. The cryptic line, "That which is below is like that which is above," suddenly made terrifying sense. The gods' flawed creations mirrored humanity's own spiritual imperfections. A 16th century engraving by Heinrich Kunrath even depicts the celestial vaults as a series of nested glass alembics, each distilling a different aspect of the soul. But the real breakthrough came with the concept of solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. To Renaissance magicians, the sky crypts embodied this core alchemical principle. The Greek titan Prometheus, chained in Tartarus with his regenerating liver, became the ultimate metaphor for cyclical purification. Occult manuscripts redrew his torment as a symbolic process. The eagle's daily feast represented the dissolution of base instincts, while the nightly regeneration mirrored the soul's renewal. Even the Norse god Loki's bonds woven from his son's entrails were reinterpreted as the painful but necessary sacrifice of earthly attachments to achieve enlightenment. The most startling adaptation, however, emerged in the writings of the enigmatic Count Saint Germain. His most holy Trinosophia describes a visionary ascent through 7 celestial prisons, each corresponding to a planetary metal and human vice. The Aztec Teotihuacan tombs reappear as saturnine chambers where leaden ignorance must be burned away. The Hindu Kalasutra's mantra chains become sound formulae to shatter inner illusions. Most strikingly, St. Germain claimed the Yoruba Oran Apadi Ogun's swirling prison of regret was actually a forge for the philosopher's stone, its relentless cycles not punishment but tempering. This mystical repurposing wasn't just philosophical. Practical grimoires like the Pacatrix included rituals to enter the crypts without wings. Adepts would meditate on seals based on cuneiform prison glyphs, believing these symbols could trap their own inner demons long enough to transmute them. A surviving parchment from the Fugger banking family's archives even details a ceremony using mirrors and black candles to bind the Tizitsumime, not to contain the Aztec star demons, but to confront the chaotic thoughts that derail enlightenment. Yet for all their ingenuity, these occult reinterpretations carried a dangerous oversight. In their zeal to spiritualize the crypts, Renaissance magicians downplayed one vital truth. The original myths warned that some forces resist transformation. The alchemist Michael Mayer learned this the hard way. His diary recounts a 1598 experiment where he invoked Tartarus energies to purify his mercury, only to suffer visions of the Hecatoncheir's 100 hands crushing his alembics. The message was clear: not all divine failures can be redeemed. Some shadows refuse to become gold. Perhaps that's why the sky crypts endure as potent symbols even today. Modern esoteric traditions still use their imagery. The lemma's Palace of the Abyss owes much to descriptions of the Juwat, while chaos magicians adapt Maui's star pits as psychological traps for self-destructive patterns. But the underlying warning remains, whispered from antiquity through Renaissance scrolls to now. Transcendence requires confronting what the gods themselves couldn't perfect. And sometimes the only way out is through. Carl Jung believed the gods of myth were never just deities. They were mirrors reflecting humanity's own buried fears and forbidden desires. From this lens, the sky crypts take on a new and unsettling meaning. They aren't just prisons for divine failures, they're manifestations of the collective unconscious, floating vaults where even the gods lock away what they refuse to acknowledge. The repressed shadow, that dark twin of the self, doesn't vanish, it festers, and if celestial beings couldn't confront their own flaws, what hope do mortals have? Consider the crypt's designs: labyrinths of mirrored walls, prisons that reflect a prisoner's shame, realms where time loops on endless regret. These aren't just punishments, they're metaphors for how the psyche handles what it denies. The Greek titan Prometheus, bound in Tartarus for gifting fire to humanity, embodies the archetype of the wounded benefactor. His torment, an eagle devouring his regenerating liver, becomes a brutal symbol of cyclical guilt. Jung might argue this isn't divine justice, but the gods' own inability to reconcile enlightenment with control. Fire, like knowledge, can't be taken back once given. So they chain the giver and pretend the gift doesn't exist. The Norse Loki, trapped in a cave with venom dripping onto his face, offers another chilling parallel. His bonds are made from his son's entrails, a grotesque illustration of how trauma begets trauma. When we refuse to integrate our shadow, it lashes out through the very ties meant to restrain it. Loki's prison is psychological projection made literal. The gods disgust at his chaos externalized into physical torment. Yet his eventual escape at Ragnarök mirrors Jung's warning. The repressed always returns, often with apocalyptic fury. Even the Aztec Teotihuacan tombs, gilded cages where disgraced sun gods wither in splendor, echo a universal human fear: perfectionism's prison. The imprisoned creators aren't just banished, they're forced to watch their successors succeed where they failed. This isn't justice, it's the unbearable weight of comparison, the agony of seeing your own shortcomings magnified in someone else's triumph. Modern psychology recognizes this as the imposter syndrome of the divine, a celestial crisis of confidence locked behind jeweled bars. What makes these myths so enduring is their uncomfortable honesty. The sky crypts confess what most cultures bury. That growth requires facing what we've exiled. The Yoruba Orisha Ogun, doomed to endlessly reforge a blade that crumbles in his hands, isn't just a punished smith. He's the archetype of stagnation, trapped in the loop of unfinished transformation. The Hindu Asura Vaults, where demons relive their worst moments, mirror the psyche's habit of replaying old wounds instead of healing them. These aren't just divine dungeons. They're cautionary tales about the cost of avoidance. The terrifying beauty of Jung's interpretation lies in its inversion. If the crypts represent the gods' unprocessed shadows, then their weakening seals the fraying chains of Gleipnir, the crackling mantras of the Kala Sutra aren't flaws in design. They're inevitabilities because the shadow doesn't stay buried. It seeps into dreams, erupts as irrational fears, poisons relationships with unspoken resentments. The sky crypt's slow decay suggests even deities couldn't outrun this truth. Their prisons were never meant to hold forever, only until the reckoning. Perhaps that's why these myths resonate so deeply today. In an age of curated identities and performative positivity, the sky crypts whisper a forbidden truth: perfection is a lie. The Aztecs sacrificed thousands to keep their sun from joining its failed predecessors. We sacrifice authenticity to maintain facades, but the crypt's lesson remains: what isn't integrated will eventually invade. The real horror isn't the monsters locked away. It's recognizing how many of them wear our faces. The influence of these ancient sky crypts stretches far beyond mythology. Their eerie silhouettes haunt our modern stories, reshaping how we imagine divine punishment in comic books, video games, and blockbuster films. Marvel's Asgard, for instance, isn't just a golden city of heroes. Its dungeons echo Norse myth's Ironwood with chilling precision. The comics depict the Ragnarok chasm, a rift beneath the royal palace where Odin imprisons entities like the Mangog, a creature forged from the collective hatred of a vanquished race. Just like Gleipnir's unbreakable ribbon, these bonds are woven from paradox chains inscribed with runes that tighten when the prisoner struggles, mirroring the god's cruel ingenuity. Even Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, briefly becomes a prison in the Godbomb arc, trapping Gore the god butcher in an endless lightning storm, a direct nod to the Hindu Kala Sutra's time-twisting torment. Video games, too, breathe new life into these celestial vaults. Final Fantasy's Pandemonium floats above the ruined world of FF2, its inverted towers housing the game's most devastating foes. The dungeon's design, shifting corridors, gravity-defying staircases feels ripped from Hindu descriptions of Patala's 7 layers. Similarly, God of War reimagines Tartarus as a living entity, its walls pulsating with the Titan's screams. When Kratos climbs its chains, the player hears whispers not just from Greek myth but from Aztec star demons and Yoruba exiles, blending global prison lore into a single, suffocating descent. Even indie gems like Hades twist the concept. The underworld isn't just a pit but a sentient maze that reshapes itself based on the prisoner's fears, a modern take on the Mayan Xibalba's psychological traps. Films, though, make the crypts visceral. Thor, Ragnarok's gladiatorial arena on Sakaar, that's Ironwood reimagined as a cosmic trash heap, where the Grandmaster's neon-lit Colosseum echoes the Tuatha De Danaan's deceptively beautiful Shia prisons. And who could forget Doctor Strange's mirror dimension? Its fractal prisons, where time loops and space folds onto itself, are practically lifted from the Asura Vaults mantra chains. Even Pacific Rim's Breach, a dimensional rift imprisoning kaiju at the ocean's depths, follows the sky crypt's core rule: some mistakes must be buried where they can't crawl back. Yet the most fascinating adaptations aren't direct copies, they're subversions. The Good Place turns the celestial prison into a sitcom purgatory, where ethical dilemmas replace physical chains. The show's rebooted neighborhoods function like the Taoist Dixing Tianlao, tweaking punishments until rehabilitation sticks. Meanwhile, Sandman's depiction of Lucifer's empty hell flips the script entirely. When the demons abandon their post, the damned choose to stay, trapped not by divine will but by their own guilt, a psychological twist even Jung would applaud. What makes these modern retellings so compelling is their acknowledgement of the crypt's original purpose, not just to punish but to warn. From Attack on Titan's walls hiding colossal sins to Mass Effect's reapers hibernating in dark space, our stories keep resurrecting the idea that some truths are too dangerous to leave uncontained. The aesthetic changes: holographic cells instead of star metal, AI wardens instead of hundred-handed giants, but the core fear remains, because whether you're a Norse god or a Netflix protagonist, one truth transcends time and medium: the past never stays buried. It just waits for the lock to rust. Could the gods' abandoned prisons still linger in the forgotten corners of our atmosphere? Modern reports of aerial phenomena often mirror ancient descriptions of these celestial vaults: glowing geometric shapes hovering at the edge of space, metallic structures glimpsed in storm clouds, even unexplained electromagnetic distortions near the tropopause. In 1948, a U.S. Air Force pilot chasing a UFO over Kentucky described a floating black pyramid that matched Babylonian accounts of the obtuse star metal plating. Decades later, astronauts aboard the ISS filmed a cluster of oblong objects near the thermosphere, uncannily similar to Hindu texts' depictions of Kalasutra prisons drifting between dimensions. The most compelling parallels emerge from declassified military encounters. Project Blue Book's Case 674 details a 1957 incident where radar operators tracked a massive disc-shaped anomaly over Montana at 70,000 feet, precisely the altitude where Aztec legends placed Ilhuacatl-Teotihuacan. Witnesses described its surface as shifting like liquid mercury, echoing the tomb's self-repairing walls. Even more chilling are the similarities between modern Black Triangle UFOs and Celtic descriptions of the Shia prison's three-pointed vessels humming with an otherworldly resonance. High-altitude research balloons have captured equally puzzling data. In 2019, a NASA atmospheric probe malfunctioned near the mesosphere, its last transmission showing a sudden temperature spike and an acoustic signature resembling the gong-like tones mentioned in Tibetan accounts of sky crypts. Meanwhile, civilian pilots regularly report gravity wells over the Andes, invisible vortices that briefly drag aircraft upward, aligning with Inca tales of sky anchors used to tether divine failures. Perhaps the most provocative evidence comes from infrasound. Monitoring stations worldwide detect ultra-low frequency pulses originating from the upper stratosphere, some matching the exact vibrational patterns described in Egyptian Juat unlocking rituals. Scientists dismiss these as atmospheric turbulence, but ancient texts warn that certain crypts sang when their seals weakened. The Hopi even predicted these phenomena, their oral histories describing the buried ones tuning their voices before a great upheaval. Whether these anomalies are coincidences, misinterpretations, or something far stranger, one thing is clear: humanity never stopped watching the skies for signs of those divine mistakes. Maybe we sense on some primal level that not all the crypts stayed sealed, and perhaps the most unsettling question isn't whether they still exist, but whether something inside is finally learning how to knock. If you wanted to trace the echoes of these mythic sky crypts today, you wouldn't need a spaceship, just a good pair of hiking boots and a sharp eye. Ancient cultures often anchored their celestial nightmares to real-world landmarks, transforming towering peaks and eerie atmospheric phenomena into physical stand-ins for those cosmic prisons. Take Nepal's Kola Patthar, a jagged black ridge overlooking Everest. Sherpa guides still refuse to camp on its slopes after dusk, claiming the wind carries voices from Ngadak Gurnpa, the monastery that isn't there. A spectral structure locals say flickers in the thin air like a glitch in reality. Climbers who have strayed too close report sudden temperature drops and the unmistakable scent of burning metal. chillingly reminiscent of the star metal walls described in Mesopotamian myths. Then there's Venezuela's Cerro Ortona, a sheer sandstone mesa piercing the Amazon canopy. The Pyroa people call it Wahari Kuawai, the tree of life, but their legends tell a darker story. They believe its hollow core houses the Haiwa, spirits banished by their gods for fouling the first sunrise. Modern expeditions have confirmed the mountain is in fact a colossal cave system, its walls etched with 12,000-year-old petroglyphs showing winged figures dragging chains upward. Even stranger are the electromagnetic anomalies detected near its summit, where compasses spin wildly and drones lose signal, as if something inside the mountain actively resists observation. But you don't need to scale mountains to brush against these ancient prisons. Certain cloud formations have long been viewed as their ephemeral blueprints. In the Andes, the Manche Puyu, or Tear of Heaven, appears only before earthquakes, a lenticular cloud so perfectly cylindrical. The Inca believed it marked where the gods had drilled a temporary hole into Honenpacha, the upper world, to discard their mistakes. Similarly, Somali sailors still avoid patches of singing fog near the Horn of Africa, where mist rolls in against the wind while emitting a low hum matching the frequency of Tibetan Dungchen horns used in rituals to pacify sky-bound demons. Perhaps the most visceral connections lie in architecture. Bhutan's Taksang Palphog Monastery clings to a cliff face 3,000 feet above the Paro Valley, its location deliberately mirroring the floating prisons of Vajrayana Buddhism. Monks here maintain a shrine to the Drekpa Kundli, a race of half-formed deities sealed inside nearby peaks after they attempted to rewrite karma. The shrine's murals depict these beings trapped in shimmering spheres, a motif eerily echoed in the blue UFO phenomenon regularly photographed over Mount Havala in Ukraine, where cobalt orbs hover near a Soviet-era observatory built atop a sacred Scythian sky burial site. Even urban landscapes hold traces. Mexico City's Templo Mayor was deliberately aligned so that every August 12th, the setting sun casts the shadow of Tzitzimime star demons across its steps, a date matching the Aztec festival of Miquelhuitantli, when priests performed bloodletting to renew the locks of Ilhuicatl Teotiocan. Nearby, workers excavating the metro in 1978 uncovered a 20-ton monolith of Tloltecutli, the Earth Monster, her stone body carved with constellations that don't match any known sky map. Archaeologists later realized they were viewing a negative, the stars as seen from inside a celestial tomb looking outward, a perspective no human eye should possess. These places share an uncanny trait. They disrupt modern technology as readily as they fueled ancient nightmares. The Brandberg Massif in Namibia, where sandrock art depicts sky caves holding the gods' first flawed humans, emits radio static that garbles GPS signals. Bolivia's Sajama lines, ancient geoglyphs stretching 16 kilometers toward the heavens, become briefly visible on infrared satellite images during solstices, as if responding to some celestial key. It's as though the myths embedded in these landscapes retain just enough power to remind us the line between legend and reality was never as solid as we'd like to think. And sometimes, when the light hits just right, you can still see the cracks where the old world bled through. The scale of these celestial crypts is almost beyond human comprehension, entire worlds of divine failure suspended above us, hidden in plain sight. Floating ruins where titans scream into the void, inverted heavens where star demons gnaw at the seams of reality, gilded cages holding gods who dared too much. From the Babylonian Abzu's star metal vaults to the Polynesian star pits humming with forgotten songs, these prisons weren't just built to contain. They were designed to erase, to scrub the cosmos clean of mistakes too dangerous to exist. And yet they linger. Like cosmic scars, they remind us that even the divine are capable of catastrophic miscalculation. But here's the chilling thought: what if these crypts are just the ones we know about? Every culture describes vaults for their gods' worst blunders, but what about the ones no myth survives to name? The experiments abandoned in cosmic dead zones, the prototypes too unstable to even classify. Could there be crypts drifting in the voids between galaxies, prisons so old their creators forgot them? The Aztecs believed the fifth sun's tomb was already built, waiting empty in the dark. The Norse whispered of realms beyond Yggdrasil's branches, where even Odin feared to look. What nightmares might still be out there, unrecorded, unremembered, but not gone? This isn't just about ancient stories, it's about the uncomfortable truth they carry, that creation is messy, even for gods. Every civilization that imagined these sky crypts was grappling with the same terrifying idea: perfection is a myth. Behind every gleaming pantheon, there's a locked door. Beneath every grand creation story, there's a buried draft. And the most unsettling question isn't what's sealed away, but what happens if the locks don't hold. So what do you think? Are these crypts just metaphors, or could there be a kernel of truth hidden in the myths? Maybe you've heard legends we haven't covered, local tales of floating ruins or forbidden sky places. Or maybe you've spotted something strange in the clouds, a shape that doesn't belong. The ancients watched the heavens for signs of weakening seals. Perhaps we should too, because if there's one lesson these myths scream across the centuries, it's this: the past never really stays buried. It just waits.